I'm not even going to look at the notes for the next speaker. This one I feel like I was born to riff on. Our next speaker, surely you know him. You may know him through his work on Abiotic Factor, the #1 game on Steam when it released, as one of the heads of Deep Field Games down in Dunedin. You may know him for his narrative work back in Rocketworks. You may even know him from his film writing career before all of this. Surely you've seen him on this stage at NZGDC and other stages. I met him speaking at the Big Screen Symposium, doing a talk on how writing for games is different from film, and we have been dear friends ever since. One of the most extroverted Kiwis I've ever met, which makes me feel a little bit better about myself. But most importantly, I have never failed to see him be kind and open and deliberately welcoming to anyone he's ever met in any conversation I've witnessed. Please welcome up to the stage, Henry Feltham!
Before I actually introduce myself or do anything, I want to say this is a talk I gave at We Play last year. It's based on that. It's about how to make games that people love. It's partly in Mandarin. It's heavily in Mandarin because I was delivering it to a Mandarin-speaking audience. I was going to change it and pull that stuff out, but then I thought about it for a bit late on a Tuesday night and decided that actually it sort of was apt for my thesis, and hopefully that makes a little bit of sense by the time I'm done. I hope so. Kia ora te whānau. My name is Henry Feltham. I'm originally from Wellington, but o te poti te kāinga in Naine. I am the narrative designer for Abiotic Factor. I was also a producer, although recently that changed. I don't produce it anymore. Tuli Ahonen and her team does that. Tuli, where are you? Hi. I do other stuff. I write. My email says narrative and partnerships. I do the stuff that people who are really, really good at making games aren't always so good at. I started Deep Field in 2021. There were 5 of us. There's about 25 now. We make co-op games. That's what we do. We love co-op. We love the fact that they're a social world that fosters cooperation and trust and working together to solve problems. And I could go on and on and on about the anthropology of co-op games because it fascinates me, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to introduce Abiotic Factor. This was our first game. We've made games before. It's a game for 1 to 6 players. It's story-based. It's a survival crafter. You're scientists making weird inventions to escape from your underground facility. You're smart, but you're not strong. In terms of its history, I think the first commit was October 2021. We demoed at PAX in 2022. Shout out to PAX Oz. It's a dope festival. If anyone hasn't been or has a chance to go, please do. It's really, really rad. And thank you for Code for getting us there. Code. That made a big, big difference. It went into early access in May 2024 and 1.0 in July 2025. I think we're sort of sniffing at about 2 million sales, and it's still selling strongly, which is cool. It's got a lot of amazing stuff coming too. Like the stuff we're going to be doing is just so cool. But what's really good about this game, about this thing that we made, the game I made, started making 15 years into my career, and I'm now in about my 20th year in the industry, is that people really love it. Like they really love it. I've never worked on something that people felt so passionately about. How does this happen? And New Zealanders aren't very good at owning this, but it doesn't happen by accident. It's not an accident. I see my job as a producer, when I was a producer, as reducing the need for luck. It's de-risking. Everything you do is de-risking, and I can hear Navi nodding. But because de-risking, it's such a boring word, man. But it covers up a lot of really sexy shit. Like, Because half of what you do, like half of what you do, is de-risking. And, you know, sure, a big part of it is watching the budget and keeping your burn manageable and following the numbers and tracking the dates and tracking the conversations so that everyone knows what's happening and what the fuck is going on. But it's also about knowing what you're making and who you're making it for and zeroing in on that so hard that you're always making this thing cooler and more amazing and brilliant and satisfying and exciting, and so losing within that it cannot fail, which is a big, bold call and not completely true, but you know what I mean. And it's satisfying and exciting. You know, I want to talk about 5 decisions that we took as a company to make Abiotic Factor so sticky that people just want to live in it and stay inside it. And the big one it's always going to be audience. Like, it's always the big one, and in a way, it's kind of the only thing that actually matters. Like, who's actually going to play this? Who cares? This is not to scale, but we did a lot of investigation, a lot of thinking, a lot of talking, a lot of data, a lot of analysis, heavily driven by some stuff that Nadia Thorne talks really, really well about, and a lot of people do. But I think some of Nadia's inter-GDC talks get into this in a really practical, amazing way. We knew that co-op was huge. We know that survival is, I think, the largest PC genre. We know that story games are really, really strong. We also know, and we were fascinated by, Half-Life as an ethos that we felt was ripe, and that kind of source engine game that we as a generation felt so strong about, that was ripe for sort of a return and was part of this emerging zeitgeist. And we also, like, you know, with the retro, well, it's not really a retro game. We know that there's an aesthetic out there that we would be kind of, you know, we could lean into a little bit as well. We thought there was an audience here. It was like, what is there? What's in the middle of all those things? It was just a lot bigger than we expected. And so we ended up. I will say, just as an aside, I want to fully own the fact that making something and having it not land it's really hard, and it's often a failure of de-risking. There's a lot of things that can happen along the way, and there's a lot of accidents that can cause things to fail for reasons completely outside your control. But also success, like something being massively more successful, because the audience here was a lot bigger than we realized. There is a sense in which that is a failure of understanding and a failure as well. And that's a very, very nerdy producer thing to say, but I do believe it. The next thing that we thought was absolutely critical, but came with a bit of a risk, was story. I'm a narrative designer, so of course I would say this, and Rick would say this, and Laura would say this. People love stories. We need stories. They're how we understand the world, they're how we understand ourselves, they're how we understand everything. I would argue that the worst points in life are those times when we have no story to tell about what's happening to us. So we added a story in an interesting way to a genre where there weren't actually that many. Co-op survival with story didn't really exist. Basically, it felt like Subnautica was out there, sort of, and that was it. The risk, and publishers said this to us a lot, was stories make games less replayable. How are you going to make a co-op game and that people just won't play once and then fuck off? And I had that conversation a lot. What I discovered is that's not true in co-op gaming. Co-op gaming is about who you play with, and that makes the biggest difference. Lots of people play with friends, and then solo, and then with different friends, and it was a different experience entirely every time you played it. So, I mean, it did scare us, but it just became really quickly obvious that we didn't need to have worried. And then once we discovered this in some of our early playtests, and then through the journey from early access to 1.0, we let story guide everything. It gave the people a character they could inhabit, a very strong character that lent into role play and really absorbing yourself in the world, because it was a bit of a cipher, but it's also something you could lean into and make your own. It was the world they could live in, but it also guided design. Story told us that we were scientists who were smart but not strong. But the early part of the game, when we first tried it out, we felt the power curve was way too high. So we said, slow it down. This is not a power fantasy. It told us how our levels should look. It told us how our characters should talk. It told us how to make the game. And it gave players an incredible experience. And story became the glue for us. The risk beyond that is the success risk. Again, when people get really involved in the story and really invested, and then you run the risk of being disappointed, particularly when you're delivering your game in episodes, essentially. Some people didn't like the ending. What they had in their head didn't match what we gave them. And it's always going to be a risk. But it's the endings that we had in our heads from the very beginning. And when you lure people into your world and things don't work out like they hoped, it's hard. And some people hate a cliffhanger. Okay. The other one, and I can get very, very boring about this, is just learn from other games. We took inspiration everywhere we could. There's nothing new under the sun. Congratulations if anybody can actually tell me what chapter and verse in the Bible that's from. But people were saying this 2,000 years ago. Most of the problems in the creative industries, other people have solved. Other games. Find the best example and learn from it. Take inspiration. We took so much. We got obsessed with so many games for a week or a month. We had heaps of our own ideas, but we looked at other people's too, because when you combine ideas, you get a new thing. And that's not all we do, of course. But by leaning into other people's solutions, it gave us time to solve the things that generally we confronted and other people hadn't solved in the specific permutation. Like, it's massive. Identify what you like and how it could work within the setting of your game, and then pile them on top of each other in a way that supports your own mechanics, your balancing, your pace, your world, your UI, your soundtrack, your audio, your community, your marketing, your production. And I just want to shout out some of the things we learned from, like Subnautica's resource-based gating, Dark Souls level design, just Valheim generally, Half-Life's aesthetic, Minecraft's UI and inventory management, Sea of Thieves, that's just the experience playing Sea of Thieves. We played this during COVID, and that's pretty much like we had the idea to start a company. We're like, fuck, this is great. We should make something like this. We could make something like this. And you end up with a sticky, effective, engaging product. And that helps people get obsessed because you're using stuff you know works. And don't throw it in without adding something of yourself to it. Never do that. And that is a point, I think, that sort of loosely aligns with what Johnson is talking about in a sort of at a very high level. The foundations of capitalism are literally just mixing your labor with something else and it becomes yours. Don't fuck with John Locke. That's the opposite of smart, just taking it and putting it in as is. Don't do that, in case Johnson's point had been lost on anybody. Throw it in because it works. And if you make good decisions about your inspirations, you're already ahead. You get to your audience faster with a better game. And it sounds kind of flaky, but really I want to just pay homage and give mana to these games. Imagine these devs are part of your dev team. Because games we love kind of are, They're talking to us. And try and listen. And then make something that has all the bits of this and then more. The next one, and I kind of know how this sounds, but I swear I'm going somewhere with this, is streamable content. Early on, we made sure that there'd be easy content for streamers. In this picture, in the third section of the game, you run up against these robots that will come and grab you and then try and run and take you to a place where they'll lock you up. And your friends have basically got to stop them. And when you see it happening to the players for the first time, every single time a coconut, it's fucking hilarious, because no one sees it coming. And like, streamers were the main marketing that mattered to us, and we knew that from the outset, that it was going to be something that was shared virally, and we wanted to lean into that. And this is also in the nature of really good co-op experiences, I think. Interesting fact, I was originally talking about this with a Chinese audience, where all streamers actually get paid. There's not really monetization in the same way that it works here. It's not really the point right now. Like, streamers need content, and we need streamers. When it's done well, it's a really great relationship. But the point I wanted to make, actually, was that if streamers get excited, players will get excited. Streamers are the hardest players to satisfy in certain senses. And if the moments in your game make good streaming content, your game is making those moments. Your game is exciting and unpredictable, or whatever. Players are going to love it too. So think about how your game will stream, because that's also how it plays, how it hooks people. And it's really, really simple as an idea, but just never let it out of sight, I would argue. And this is like, I've blasted through this, but I do tend to talk quite fast. If you can, like, over-deliver. We always try to give people more than they expect, like give them heaps. Lots of people review the game and say, I just didn't know how big it is. And I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. We were like, yeah, it's big. You can spend 150 hours in there, easy. Don't break your team. Don't break yourself. But give players as much as you can. Make it amazing. And I think my job as a producer, when I was doing that job, was trying to find a way to say yes to ideas. There was a period, I think, where I was actually a bit more combative early on, and I was like, no, guys, we've got to get this out, just come on, we can't do all this stuff. And then that stuff would sort of end up happening anyway. So I realized that my role was really more about to figure out how to do that in a way that was sustainable and get those ideas in there, because the ideas are fantastic. I've never sat in my design meetings and gone, like, these ideas are terrible, because they're not. You want to say yes, I want to say yes. So that notion of over-delivering, I think, was important to us. And I hope that, having said all this, that it's a bit more obvious now why I left the Mandarin in here. Because part of that over-delivering and part of growing passion in players is reaching out to them and having the players move towards you. We try and keep really, really close to our players. So the more you connect, the more you communicate, the more involved and the more obsessed they become. And that is everything I had to say.
Lucky for you all, we have tons of time for questions. So keep us on time. Hands up, microphones. We got one in the back.
Hi, I was wondering what role, if any, the game Unfortunate Spacemen had in the story of creating Abiotic Factor.
Oh, yeah, right. So I met Zag at Rocketworks when he was a designer there, and he had come to us to work on projects as a designer, but he also had Unfortunate Spacemen, which had just gone to 1.0. And Unfortunate Spacemen, if you haven't played it, is an async social deception co-op game, co-op multiplayer, free to play, did about 1 million downloads. And I think, well, it gave us a lot of credibility, because even though it wasn't strictly speaking a deep field game, it showed the people on board. And like our base crew was basically the Unfortunate Spacemen crew plus me and then Tim Ponting. Knew how to make large-scale co-op games, knew what we were doing, were pretty safe hands, which made like pitching to publishers easier, because we'd done something like that. So to say that this is our first game is, to say that ABF is our first game is inaccurate. It's our second, really. And I think we discovered async is a shit of genre to balance and make work. And so we decided we wanted to do co-op, but we also believed strongly coming out of COVID that co-op as a form was something that kept us sane and brought people together, whereas Unfortunate Spaceman, for all its strengths, is quite a chaotic and quite oppositional game, and we'd learned from that. And we knew about making all the networking and all that stuff we'd done, but we also learned from that and made decisions about how to make Abiotic Factor just a little bit more of a controlled experience, I also would argue that Abiotic Factor is a cozy game. And you laugh, but it totally is, man. People spend just like tens, hundreds of hours in building out their base, chilling, setting up their defenses. I'm in my safe zone. I'm going to cook some weird-ass alien goulash, and I'm happy.
Shot Henry.
Thanks, bro. Thanks.
Bit of a selfish question. What do you take from Zero? I saw her up there.
Well, the incredible amount that a very, very small team can do. Like Josh my God. Also lessons for how that rollout succeeded, lessons for how that rollout didn't succeed. Being able to respond to a sudden influx of players. We'd seen that in advance, so when ABF did boom, we saw what had worked for Zero and what hadn't. And I'm trying to think, it's way back now. But I mean, Zero, when it came out, it boomed, but then it didn't really have the content pipeline to deliver a whole lot more into it to satisfy the player base. So we made sure that there was, and we made sure that we had really clear roadmaps. We made sure we knew what we were doing. We also had lots of game loops that would keep that, for that first early access thing, we got 4 levels. You could spend a whole lot of time in there, and it would buy us the time to bring out the next update and the next update, but making sure we also really cleaved to that roadmap. Like we try and stick to our roadmap really, really hard. Yeah.
Thank you.
West.
You touched on how it felt to have a game not land. How important do you think that is to finding success in the first game as a team together?
If I understand the question, it's just a different set of problems, right? There's a set of problems that comes with something not landing. There's a set of lessons that come with that can be totally harnessed, and we've all seen that and been part of those projects. We've got a different set of problems now, which is the management that comes with expansion and sudden attention, right? And those are the good problems to have, the problems that Runaway has right now. These are the problems you want, and figuring out how to manage that. But the whole trajectory of Deep Field has been dealing with it like a new set of problems at every single time, right? You start the company, you figure out how to start a company, and then you figure out how to get a game into early access, and then you figure out how to deliver content and continue to get that game to 1.0, and you figure out how to port that game, and then you figure out how to deliver content to like a game at the point at which it's almost like a live service game, and then you try and figure out how to run a company so that you can run a live service game and then start another project up, and there's never a point where you can actually sit down, or feel like tomorrow is going to be like today was. And again, I'll shout out Runaway again here, and as the sort of the allegory for like how I think about it. Every single game that both did really well or didn't, like in Runaway, was really analyzed and figured out what happened and what worked, what didn't, and every single one of those led to Hatch Dragons, right? So all of those things with the successes and the failures, if they're treated, with due respect and intelligently and I guess candidly, turns into a better chance along the road if you can keep it rolling. Good work. Anybody else? Hey, Levi.
Thank you. So, because Abiotic Factor is really complicated and there's it seemed like scope wasn't really a consideration. Just as a player, when you're playing through it, you're like, my God, there's more and more and more of this. That can't be the case. How did you guys, when you're doing the initial idea and then when you're starting to build it out, how did you decide between like, is it we're setting the story first and then we've got like kind of these systems that could build around it, or how do you decide what complements or adds and what's not, just kind of diluting?
I think it's a judgment call most of the time. But story is a useful lens for looking at something, and I mean story in the broadest sense. I mean story in the world, because there's not actually that much of like, the story is deployed quite like, sort of, it's distributed around the whole thing. But there's a story in the world, there's a story in the aesthetic and the design, there's a story in this, the notion of you being the scientist underground the whole time. And there's just, and you making these kind of like, these strange sort of jugaad contraptions. And so you can look at that and go, okay, let's say we want to throw in a vacuum cleaner that shoots poo. And like, is that going to fit the game? Or is that not quite right? And you look at the sort of the, all of the surrounding, like the story and the aesthetics and go, yeah, nah. But really that stuff gave us a lens through which to make those decisions. And it wasn't always clear, but at least we had like a context for any given question.
We have time?
Anything else? We good? Covered it. Done.
Just shout it.
Okay, yeah, fellow Americans, so boys. I think one of my favorite parts of this talk was you shouting out all the games that inspired
Yeah, hell yeah.
inspired you with this. And I'm wondering, like, so one of the things you said was like, these games are talking to you, so you should listen. There are so many different parts of the games that you showed up on the screen, and I'm wondering, like, how you guys went through the process of testing what you thought would work, and then putting it in the game and seeing and give it like support your story, your vision.
Yeah, well, the best example of that would be if I could think of something we tried and it failed. But essentially it was like treating other games as if you're playtesting your own game and then going, okay, this works like this. Would that work for us? If it did, what would that be like? Because obviously it can't be exactly the same. But I'm vaguing on like examples where we sit around going, would this be a good idea? But an example of what did work was like Core Keeper, who did a crossover with. They had a thing called the transmog, where you can basically take off or basically replace your actual armor with a sort of a cosmetic armor, so you can have the stats of the stuff underneath, but you can have the look of anything else you want. And I remember Zag just being like, oh, this is a really great idea. And I'm like, is anyone really going to care about this? But it became a really central part to the sort of the offer of role play that we give people in the game. And he saw that and he understood that, and I've just long since learned just to trust Zag's instincts most of the time, particularly if I don't completely understand what he's talking about. Because he's thinking very, very deeply about that, and I'm very, very grateful to him as a human being and as a game designer, because he has a really strong sense for that. But when we used to think of something that we fucked up. We tried to introduce an insanity mechanic, I think, which must have, I can't even remember where that came, maybe it came from like 7 Days to Die or something, and that just didn't work for us. I mean, we just had to admit, like, we can't service that. It makes the whole experience too complicated. It becomes quite onerous in a game that's already, like, at that stage was fairly onerous. So yeah, conversations like that.
I think we can do one more.
Or not.
Also find Henry outside over lunch.
Yeah.
And not give him a chance to eat.
Hey, thank you very much for listening to my talk, guys.